Senator Back.
Acting Deputy President, thank you. This afternoon in the Western Australian Parliament, Treasurer Nahan brought down a budget which confirms a $1.3 billion deficit this financial year, moving to a $3 billion deficit in the next financial year, the first deficit in living memory, probably certainly more for a decade. It speaks, of course, of the need for selling state assets. Acting Deputy President, this evening I stand in this place to rail against the circumstances that caused this state to go into deficit to the tune of $1.3 billion, moving to $3 billion, and indeed putting our AAA rating at risk. I make this point, Acting Deputy President, that every Western Australian man, woman and child contributes some $2,370 per year to GST, and it gets back next financial year a measly $714. It is not enough, it is not good enough, and it must stop. When I say that this state is moving to a $3 billion deficit next year, let me give you this figure. Western Australia's GST will plummet to historic depths this year, with the state to retain just $1.9 billion of the $6.4 billion paid by Western Australian taxpayers, more than double the state's deficit. The state of South Australia, with less than two-thirds of our population, will receive nearly triple the amount of GST per capita that Western Australia receives. Tasmania, a state with only 20% of Western Australia's population, will receive $300 million more next year than Western Australia receives. Acting Deputy President, I urge the Senate and the Parliament to consider these facts because they are out of balance and they must be restored. In 2014-15, New South Wales will get just under its own figure back, 0.98 of 1. Victoria, 88 cents in the dollar. Queensland, $1.08, in consideration of past problems with cyclones, etc. Western Australia, 38 cents in the dollar, reducing to 36, 35 and even lower. South Australia, $1.30. Tasmania, $1.63. The ACT, here in Canberra, $1.24 for every dollar it generates, and the Northern Territory, if you don't mind, $5.66. On a per capita basis, 10 times the price that the Western Australians receive from the GST. Acting Deputy President, the question I want to know and ask is, how robust is our federation? The immediate issue is the distortion of the current GST distribution, and I say to you, unfortunately, it is exposing a bad flaw in our federation. And there is not a Western Australian of any side of the persuasion that does not feel this keenly. If the objective in creating a federation of states in the first place was to create stability that encourages common interests, reduce differences across territorial boundaries and deliver mutual benefits to the community, then I say to you we have fallen well short of those worthy principles, and the entire Western Australian community is sick of it. When I rose in this place to give my first speech in 2009, some 6 years ago, I made the observation that we produce 40% of the nation's wheat, that we contribute significantly in the minerals and the LNG area, and that a third at that time of Australia's export wealth from only 10% of the population. And at that time, Acting Deputy President, I said that we'd only receive 87% of the GST revenue, reducing to 57%. It is now 38%, reducing to 30%. And at the time I said it represented a loss of $300 million to the Western Australian economy. It is now $6.3 billion to the Western Australian economy, when the Treasurer today was forced down to bring a budget in which he reports a $3 billion deficit. The state represents more than 70% of all export income earning for the country, and it gets a lousy 38 cents in the dollar back. It is not good enough. I say to you, Acting Deputy President, the Commonwealth Grants Commission, the horizontal fiscal equalisation process is flawed. It's crooked. it's not horizontal, it's crooked. It's not equalisation, it's discriminatory. And the idea of one state receiving 30 cents in the dollar when another territory gets $5.66, I say to you, is unfair. Where, I ask, in the Grants Commission process, is there a clause that rewards performance and penalises waste? I don't see it. Why would one state try hard when another state knows very, very well that it does not have to do anything for picking it up? Where is the incentive for our home state of Western Australia to continue investing heavily in projects that yield results for the entire nation, where it looks to the east and sees others demonstrating little, if any, motivation to maximise their revenue to add to increase of the GST share for everyone? Acting Deputy President, under the Grants Commission formula, it is possible that Western Australia's share of GST could reduce to $0. Well, I say to you, if and when that day comes or looks like coming, I will stand up here and I will say the federation is flawed and it is time that we re-examine it or we depart from that federation. We've had enough of this. New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, which appear to have declared moratoria on gas exploration and development, are advantaged under the GST distribution system. I ask, where will they derive their future energy sources to supply their manufacturing, their commercial and business activity, their residential services, if they fail to develop their own resources? What are they looking at? A long pipeline from Western Australia or down from Queensland? Premier Colin Barnett is quite right when he says that Labor and the Greens did their best to turn Tasmania into a national park. Acting Deputy President, when I owned a fuel distributorship in Tasmania in the late 1990s, my significant clients included fishing, forestry and mining organisations. All three in that state have been decimated, and has it bothered them? Not at all. I will accede that under the Premier, Will Hodgman, is having a go, but certainly under the previous Labor governments, why would they bother when they knew that there was going to be a state that was going to so-called equalise fiscally under the GST distribution? I ask the question with regard to Victoria, 88 cents in the dollar, and I do remind Victorians what would happen to them if their share looked like going down to 38 or 30 cents in the dollar. And we suffered in the last few days the absolutely disgusting statements of the Victorian Premier and his mad Treasurer when they spoke about Western Australia being a mendicant state. How disgraceful! How disgraceful! They seem to be very, very ignorant of history, Acting Deputy President. It is the fact that historically Western Australia was a recipient state under the Grants Commission guidelines or those that preceded it. But let me make this point, and strongly. Western Australia's receipt was never a subsidy or a handout, but it was a compensation to acknowledge the scandalously high tariffs that protected non-performing manufacturers in those Rust Belt states against competition and the need for energy efficiency improvement. Nobody, as Senator Cash knows, can lay the allegation that Western Australia was not in that era trying to maximise its revenue base. Throughout that time, when it was a recipient state, the efforts of Sir David Brand and Sir Charles Court to battle obstructionist federal governments to open up the export of iron ore to Japan, they were the efforts of those premiers and ministers. And has Australia forgotten the enormous benefit that every citizen in this country has enjoyed as a result of the work of Brand and Court and those who followed them to open up that export? Acting Deputy President, how short-sighted that eastern states' premiers and first ministers would starve the highest performing state, the state with the capacity to generate most royalty income for the nation. Even their own self-interest, you would have thought, would cause them to want to put the cash where the best return is on offer. Offshore LNG royalties from the North West Shelf, such as Chevron's Gorgon, Wheatstone, Shell's Prelude, they will go straight to the Commonwealth, as you know, because they are in Commonwealth waters. But who needs to create the infrastructure? Who's created a deficit over the last couple of years because of the infrastructure to support those projects? You guessed it, it's Western Australia. I say, Acting Deputy President, if we don't get rid of this Grants Commission formula, if we don't go back to the drawing board, the future of Australia's federation, for me, is at risk.
Thank you, Senator Back.